Hi everyone, thank you for being with me. Tony Tonkin here from my show, whatever that's worth, and glad that you could be with me to have a conversation, I guess, if you care to come online, about things that are political generally. And today I'm going to talk about Alan Jones leaving Sky News, which is, from my perspective, a joy. It's a pleasure to know that the man finally has got the boot. And so we're playing a little bit of a clip, which is not about him saying that he's leaving. It's about him doing what Alan Jones does. We'll have a look at that, because I believe tonight, which is Thursday night, is going to be his last session. And hopefully I'll have a clip on that to hear all the terrible things he has to say about Sky News for giving him the boot. So we'll do that as well. But I want to start off by talking a little bit about the right-wing media here in Australia, and to, I guess, try and help us to understand why the right-wing media is so pro anything that sort of pro-Republican, pardon me, bite my tongue, terrible thing to say, to help us try and understand what it is that is the attraction and why it is that people like Paul Murray get in such a fervour over things such as the latest Virginia governorship election in the US, and how the Democrats lost that particular election, and that for some reason that gets someone like Paul Murray very, very excited. It's like orgasmic experience for Paul, and I'm at a loss as to why. My guess is that perhaps there's some sort of enjoyment he gets out of watching the right wing be successful, regardless of who it is that you're supporting, whether it be Trump or somebody else. At least you can get excited about their moronic behaviour. And as a result of that, you yourself can act rather moronic at the same time. But I just want to make a comparison between an incident that a CNN response to the race being won, and them endorsing or verifying, I guess, that the Republicans had won. And so his comments at the beginning of this video are saying, well, you know, they're all sort of very disappointed, and they're acting in a very disappointed manner in terms of the Democrats having lost the election. And if you have a look at both of these clips, firstly the clip that he plays, and then I will play the original clip from CNN, and you'll see that perhaps it's not quite the way that Paul described it. And so we need to kind of question whether or not, Paul, you really do know what you're talking about. And so let's just have a look at that clip, and then we will go from there.
How good was the results out of Virginia in the United States, where you could see how excited CNN was in having to report that a Republican won?
And I think we just need to have a look at how excited CNN were, according to Paul.
Glenn Youngkin has been elected governor of Virginia, defeating Democrat Terry McAuliffe.
Now, I admit that Jake Tapper here may not be overexcited, but I don't think he demonstrates a great sense of disappointment either.
Youngkin pulling off a critical victory for his party in the highest stakes election of the night. This is the first time Republicans have won an election for Virginia's top office in 12 years.
He won, and he won by just enough.
Now, can someone tell me whether you think that that Jake Tapper was acting in a disappointed, frustrated, angry, I don't know, if he was acting in a way which indicated to him which side of politics he sat at? I don't think he was. Perhaps you might have a completely different view of that.
Remember, anything other than a 5-point win for the Democrats was apparently going to signal further problems for them next year. I've explained before about how this is the bellwether about what happens at the parliamentary elections, which of course effectively is the handbrake on the presidency. As for statewide, not the most beautiful looking state map you've ever seen, but still, this is what it actually looks like in Virginia. Most of it red, that's the rural areas. Then you get a little bit closer to Washington, DC, that's where all of the blue vote was. And a very happy man at about 1:30 in the morning, Virginia time, was the man who was able to successfully not be too Trumpy and not be not Trumpy. Instead, just be a bloke who was willing to do it on his own and actually campaigned on saying, you know what?
And you'll hear in a moment when CNN talk about this, how that was his strategy. His strategy was not to be overly Trumpian, but to kind of walk a fine line between the two so that he didn't lose the Trump base. And you'll see these commentators on CNN later talk about what a helpful strategy that was, and if anything, that probably got him over the line.
What? All the woke stuff, it ends now.
Alrighty, Virginia.
I don't even know what he means by that. All the woke stuff. What woke stuff is he talking about that ends now? I have no idea even what that term means. And maybe it's about being politically correct. Maybe it's about respecting other people. Maybe it's about respecting ideas. And if it's about any of those things, Paul Murray wouldn't have any bloody idea anyway. And is probably the opposite to woke, which is just a disruptor, a person who tends to want to disagree with almost everything.
Virginia, we won this thing!
Now, to give you an idea, Virginia ain't old school Virginia. For a very long time, it has been basically bet the house on it that it'll be a blue state at both the state and federal.
Very long time is 12 years, Paul. Now, in your lifespan, perhaps that is a long time. In my lifespan, it's not very long at all, mate. I can remember Gough Whitlam, for example.
Level. It was a 10-point win for Joe Biden just 12 months ago on this day. And if you have a look at this map from the New York Times, it shows...
Now, just on that point, yes, it was. I'm not disagreeing with Murray on this. But what we do need to understand also is that in off years, when there isn't a presidential election, so there's some elections that are held this year. Next year, of course, there is half the Congress is elected. So there's always going to be a groundswell against the current party that's in power in the White House. And so it is nothing unusual for this to happen within these off years. So to talk about it as if it's just so absolutely unusual and rarely happens is rather bizarre and is incredulous in a way, because it just goes to show that where Paul Murray's biases are. And he goes into this explanation, which I don't know whether is all that worthwhile seeing, but we'll have a look at it just for a moment.
Every single part of the state, repeat, every single part of the state had an improvement in the Republican vote from just 1 year ago. Now,
can we just add that 1 year ago, they voted out Trump in Virginia. So that shift back may be more about Biden, it may be more about not getting anything through Congress, and it could also be about the fact that people kind of just rebel in off years when there's not a presidential race. So it could be a number of things, but Murray wants us to believe that there's been this massive red surge across Virginia, and therefore this is a statement about Biden. Now, to some extent, I don't disagree with that. Could very well be a statement against Biden. No one really knows, but they're salivating in the idea that perhaps it is.
Now, while nothing is as fun as watching the people on Channel 2 in 2019 and fingers crossed 2022, what? But we did so much. Auntie Fran.
Don't you love the way Paul Murray hides his allegiance? If this guy could never say he's a reporter because he doesn't report facts, he reports his biases. And here he is doing it again in all its glory, as if it's something to be proud of, Paul, that you're this moron that sits on the right, celebrating everything that is absurd, ridiculous, prejudicial, angry, spreading fear, spreading discontent, doing all the things you do so well, and that you should be really proud of this, Paul Murray, because you're demonstrating that perhaps perhaps Murdoch one day will do what he's doing to Jones to you, and he'll get rid of you as well, buddy.
Said it wouldn't happen. Let's have a look at some of the lefty media reactions when they realised they were going to lose.
I will tell you, somebody in high up in McAuliffe's camp who was there with McAuliffe put it this way to me about an hour ago. It's a bloodbath.
More please.
God, don't you think that just is pathetic? He is so pathetic. So we'll go on with more. There's more of this sort of assessment evaluation that he looks at, and he thinks that because CNN is CNN and that they are extremely left. Now, I have personal views about CNN and MSNBC, and I would argue that they certainly are left. I don't have an issue with any of that. But do they promote the propaganda in the same way as the right? You know, when you look at CNN, MSNBC, they're not the same as Fox News or AON or any of these other right-wing media outlets. They're just not. They do, you know, there are commentators such as Joy Reid who definitely sit further to the left than most people. But, you know, you're going to see Rachel Maddow in a second. I really like Rachel because I think she does tell it as it is from her point of view. And she's more interested in reporting the news and what's happening in some of the more integral parts of American politics than what the others do. And she's worth listening to. And, you know, what's more, you know, a lot of these people I find quite rational, even though they have they come from where I sit, I guess. And perhaps, you know, I've talked about this before about how sometimes we tend to sit in this bubble, and maybe I will accept that I do sit within this bubble. I do try and look at other news outlets just to have a look at what it is that they're doing and what value there is in anything they may be doing. But at the end of the day, this is about trying to work out the rationality. And there's sometimes I will agree with what other people say. I may not agree with their total version of events, and I may not agree with the way they look at societal issues and cultural issues and other things, but I will agree if I believe they have a rational argument. I'm not so tainted by the left wings and the progressives that I will agree with everything that they do, because I don't. But when I see the right wing, like Paul Murray in particular, trying to convince, I don't know who is convincing, because, you know, at the end of the day, are we Australians really all that concerned about what's happening in the US? I'm concerned because I believe that the way politics is turning and being manipulated in the US will eventually be part of our experience. And to some extent, that scares me, because it means the likes of Pauline Hanson and Christensen and some of these other right-wing crazy people are going to eventually start to influence how we think about politics here in this country. You know, fortunately, in this case, we don't, you know, we're not a republic, so we don't have the presidential type issues and the constitutional issues that they have in the US. And even though I am in favour of becoming a republic, so I'm a Republican, I would hate to have a system like they have in the US, which just seems to be so destructive. But on the other hand, it seems to be a division that exists. I don't know whether it's about American culture itself, and maybe it may be because it's such a diverse culture, and particularly because of their terrible history around African Americans. I do, you know, not that we have a terrible history around Indigenous people as well, for Christ's sake, as does the US. But they have this sort of tainted history that is in some ways, I was going to say it's worse now, it's probably not, but which sort of dominates their culture and their beliefs to some extent. Now, what I also wanted to have a look at was CNN's response to all of this. And I think now, so we've had a look at the way Paul Murray has viewed it. Now let's look at the way CNN have interpreted it as well, and just have a look at whether or not you think CNN were as left and as joyous as what Murray would like us to believe.
Has been elected governor of Virginia, defeating Democrat Terry McAuliffe. Youngkin pulling off a critical victory for his party in the highest stakes election of the night. This is the first time Republicans have won an election for Virginia's top office in 12 years. Again, CNN projecting Glenn Youngkin has been elected governor of Virginia. And Dana Bash, this is the announcement that Joe Biden will not be happy to hear. And it also shows how incredibly divided this country is.
Incredibly divided. Joe Biden isn't happy to hear because he and other very high-profile Democrats went to try to help Terry McAuliffe. Terry McAuliffe tried to nationalize this race by bringing in help from national Democrats.
Now, I think this is a fair criticism. So Dana Bash is saying that that McAuliffe brought in Obama, brought in Biden, and tried to nationalise the conversation, which clearly didn't work. So they made a mistake. And now this is, if this was on the right wing, they wouldn't be talking about this at all. They wouldn't be talking about the mistakes they've made. They would just talk about how terrible the other side was. They'd talk about elections being stolen, a whole host of other stuff. The left wing, it doesn't buy into that crap. In fact, on this stage, you find Dana Bash and the others talking about what it is that the Democrats could learn from this experience, as opposed to pulling the system apart and destroying everything, which is what the right wing tend to do.
While Glenn Youngkin made it incredibly Virginia focused. He said, this is about me, this is about the people in Virginia. That gave him the added benefit of being able to say, no, Mr. Former President Donald Trump, you can't come here. I don't want you to come here.
To me, this sounds like a really rational argument. And this is what I was saying before, that if we can look at things rationally, we can make sense of what's happening, as opposed to being completely irrational and aggressive and hateful and resentful, which is what the other side tend to be. This is, now Dana Bash is definitely a Democrat side of politics. There's no disputing any of that, as are all of those people on this panel. But they are prepared to look at it in a more rational and sensible manner.
Here, so that strategy worked for him. But I think that what you saw in Glenn Youngkin is going to be, for sure, the playbook that Republicans are going to try to emulate going forward in 2022 and then also in 2024. The question is whether it is possible to emulate, because he is a very unique person. Yeah. He's never been in public office before. And I saw him on the stump. He was really and is a very good candidate for what he was trying to do.
And David, you made this point earlier, didn't sort of have the kind of baggage that a lot of Republicans.
Now, doesn't this sound like a really sensible argument and a sensible discussion of the events, as opposed to the impression that Paul Murray was giving us, that there were going to be all these people sitting on the left who were just going to rip this whole process apart and who were angry about it and whatever? No, here at CNN, they're discussing it in the most reasonable, rational manner. So there is nothing wrong with what they're doing. This is reasonable reporting, as opposed to the Paul Murray stuff, which is about him getting excited about the fact that that the Democrats lost this election. You know, this is what I don't understand about the right wing, is that they have all these talking heads who do not report the events, but are just prepared to talk about their side of the argument, their perspective. Whereas what we have here is CNN, which is supposed to be relatively left, probably not as far left as MSNBC, but nevertheless quite left, and they're talking about this quite rationally and sensibly. Now, that's probably all that I need to say about the elections in the US, because at the end of the day, who gives a crap? But some of us do. And my biggest fear is that eventually, somewhere along the line, that whatever happens in the US is going to come and fester and find its little way into Australia. And we will have to deal with the same sort of issues, I guess, to some extent that they do. And that is a crazy group of people who believe in QAnon and a whole host of other crazy batshit bullshit crap that we do wonder whether or not we're living in a sane society. Now, I just want to take us to Alan Jones next. So, Jones is... what can I say about Alan Jones? Can't say anything that's all that pleasant, because I do actually believe that, Jones has always been the same. So it doesn't matter. So I can't say he's senile because he's not. But I can say that Jones believes, I think, that he controls and governs the universe. And that what he has to say is tainted and encased in truth and honesty and integrity, where in actual fact he's just flogging personal views that are just bullshit, and no one ever seems to stand up to him and say, you're wrong. He only has people, or when he was 2GB, I believe he only had people basically on that tended to agree with him. He might have a go at him because he has the microphone, he thinks he's also powerful. And now I wonder what's it going to be like for him now that he's not so powerful. What's life going to be like for this 80-year-old dude who no longer is relevant? I do wonder, and I don't feel sorry for him because he's had his time. He's been able to flog his goods for many, many years. So who knows? But let's just have a listen to him, because these are kind of some of his last words. We'll hear more from him tonight, but basically this is it.
Bureau of Meteorology was predicting today to be the wettest day since September last year for some western parts of New South Wales. They were forecasting more than a month's worth of rain in 24 hours. And New South Wales has been told to get ready for a very wet 8 days. Heavy rainfall, flash flooding and severe thunderstorms for the state's west in New South Wales.
Don't you just love the way he puts this argument together? Like, the Bureau of Meteorology is suggesting that there's going to be these rainfalls. So it can't be climate warming. So it can't be climate issues because, it's raining.
Wales, have you seen any of that? Didn't some of these climate change zealots say it'd never rain again and we'd run out of water?
Who said that? And who would believe that the idea that it would never rain again? He doesn't cite who they are, of course, because he just makes the shit up. The funny thing is he has a script for this. So he's reading this stuff. So he's thought about it quite intently. And now he's telling us that somebody said it would never rain forever. Is it no wonder this man's gone?
Now, I know it's not fashionable, but I've been telling you for years, not months, this hoopla over global warming summits. That's right, they don't call it global warming now, do they? Climate change. Well, COP26 is almost over before it began. 2 days in, and the world leaders are jetting out of Glasgow. Just on jetting, weren't they?
Oh, here we go. So, for some reason, he's got all these stats around how the pollution caused by private jets. Of course, all these people from around the world fly in on Air Force One, as we see here, and Australia, Prime Minister flies in on his version of Air Force 215. So, but he, interesting enough, he criticises all of them. But when it gets to Morrison, he chooses not to just watch it. He chooses not to criticise Morrison in the same way as he's criticised everybody else.
They're telling the world to limit carbon dioxide emissions. More than 400 of them flew in on private jets. Private jets, as one Scottish MP said, produce more global warming gas than 1,600 Scots families would burn in a year. 13,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide.
I think that if they were planning to arrive at this conference, they should have come by sailing boat. So maybe we should have got Captain Cook's Endeavour together and a crew of 30 or 40 men, I guess, because you'd only have men, you wouldn't have women. And Scott Morrison could have got behind the tiller and sailed his way to Glasgow, which would mean he would still be probably leaving Sydney Harbour about now. So, this notion that is trying to sell us, this is just bloody bizarre.
Private jets burn more than commercial flights, all of which were available to most leaders. Industry experts say the average private jet journey emits 10 times as much greenhouse gas per person as the same trip on an economy class flight, 10 times as much. Now, Scott Morrison on his RAAF aircraft can be excused because Qantas only started flying internationally again.
Of course he can be excused. Scott's Yes, of course he could, because there's no way in the world he could have hired an idle Qantas jet that'd been sitting around somewhere, or that he couldn't have hopped on a Qantas commercial flight. No, he couldn't do that. And there are commercial flights still flying out. So there's, oh God, I'm sorry, it's just painful to listen to.
On Monday, but the chief lecturers to the world, people like Andrew Forrest, flew on private jets, and now they're flying out empty-handed. Boris Johnson's trying to claim victory because the leaders from 110 countries have signed a deal promising an end to deforestation by 2030. That's big time. And 40 countries signed up to a plan to improve the use of green technologies. It's clear that nothing Boris Johnson sought in his manifesto and nothing that Biden went on about is going to be realised, as Peggy said last night.
But so we have a shot at Biden, at Johnson, and we have a shot specifically at Biden, but we don't have a shot at Morrison, who has zero plan for any of this. Like, Morrison's just out there in the wind. He's just doing his own thing with no real plan apart from, implementing technology which hasn't been invented yet. That's where Morrison's at. But this moron here is just determined to convince us that the others are bad, and that his man, Morrison, is at least doing the right thing, even though he's doing nothing.
He can't get his stuff through Congress. And of course, even the stuff about deforestation and all these other agreements aren't enforceable. And while all this is happening, as I said last night, the vote for the Virginia...
Now, I think that's interesting, the fact that they aren't enforceable. So he makes this statement. Now, I'm not going to bother Googling or searching to find out whether anything that they're planning to do is enforceable or not. I would imagine that most countries can do whatever they like. If they want to stop people from cutting down trees, that's fine. If they want to find ways to plant more trees than are being cut down, that's fine. I'm sure governments could find ways to do just that. So to say that they're not enforceable, just, talking out of his ass, I think.
Virginia governorship in America was agreed by everybody to be a poll on the presidency. This is blue ribbon Democrat country. In fact, in the presidential election of November last year, Biden won 54% of the vote. Virginia weighed in as 5.6% more Democrat than America as a whole. In the 2017 governor elections, the Democrats won 53.9% of the vote. The Republicans...
I love the way... Okay, so this is what he does. He presents with a whole host of statistics, which no one's going to dispute, because you're not going to race off, are you, while he's ranting and raving, to check it out or to fact check him in any way. And there's no reason to object to it or to say that it's wrong, because it probably isn't wrong. But he thinks that somehow he's super intelligent because he does have the ability to produce facts and statistics. And in this case, you go off, do your research, come back, write it all up, and then you have a cue card in front of you or teleprompter and you just read it out. Well done, Alan. That takes brilliance, and I can guarantee you that he didn't do it anyway. He got someone else to do it. But he's the one that tries to look smart and intelligent because he's got all the facts.
Republicans 45%. Well, now the Republican Glenn Youngkin, heavily supported by Trump, has...
That was crap. Well, hold on. I'll come back. It isn't true. Heavily supported by Trump is not completely honest, because Trump was prepared to support him, but Youngkin, as I think I said earlier, was choosing not to have him appear at many of his rallies and so forth, because they saw Trump as a hindrance. So to think that to be selling this idea is just bizarre, and it just demonstrates that Alan Jones really at this point doesn't know what he's talking about.
Defeated McAuliffe, who'd been the governor, but the Constitution prevents the office holder from holding consecutive terms. So McAuliffe didn't run in 2017, he said he'd run in 2021. The swing against the Democrats, well over 5%. And in New Jersey, where the Democrats were 56% in 2017, they've been hammered, and the Republicans have won there as well. It was, as I discussed with Peggy last night...
But to be fair, the Republicans won quite substantially in New York in the mayoral race. So they will try to paint this picture that things have been pretty terrible, when in actual fact they're nowhere near as terrible as what they would say they were. And there are definitely lessons to be learned from the Democratic side. and I guess important lessons from the Republicans as well. But what can we say? It is simply what it is. And we need in Australia, I think, to be mindful of some of these movements that are happening in other countries, because they will happen here eventually. And we need to be wary of them, because we need to counter them. And we certainly need to develop processes that are about being truthful and honest, and about rational and reasonable debates, which is something you don't tend to get if you're watching some, not all, but some right-wing media. So thanks for being with me, everybody. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.